the participants to please take their seats. Namaskar and very good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our 17th Sustainable Summit. Hope you had a fulfilling lunch. Very happy to share that to reduce the carbon footprint, certain initiatives like reduced use of paper and no usage of plastic bottles, cotton-based backdrops, hoardings and signages have been used in the summit. It is indeed an honor and privilege to welcome you all once again to the session on Future of Corporate Disclosures. I welcome all our distinguished speakers of the session who are here with us today. Some of our speakers are also joining virtually. I request our moderator, Mr. Kaushik Chatterjee, Executive Director and Chief Finance Officer, Member of Board, Tata Steel, to initiate the session. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon to all of you. My apologies as I'm joining virtually and not with you physically, but perhaps it has got an underlying impact of saving a few kgs of carbon and not taking the plane all the way to Delhi. I would like to also thank CII for inviting me to chair and moderate this session on the future of corporate disclosures. I'm joined by an illustrious panel of speakers and panelists, and I take a moment to introduce my co-panelist, Mr. Amarjit Singh, Executive Director of the Securities and Exchange Board of India, who's joining along with me virtually. Ms. Prarthana Vora, Director of CDP India, whom you can see. Mr. Aniruddha Agnihotri, the Head Environmental Sustainability, Health and Safety for Tata Consultancy Services, and Mr. Shikhar Jain, Deputy Head of the CII-ITC Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development. Thank you to all my co-panelists for taking their time out and joining this session. A few opening comments before I start the panel discussion. I think sustainability and climate resilience is now a very, very important topic for corporates, financial and non-financial stakeholders, capital markets, rating agencies, and indeed the government and the community. So this is therefore an important subject because corporate disclosures to me are at the heart of how we live this journey or pathway towards becoming more resilient as far as climate and sustainability is concerned. It leads us to also an important point because if you really get into the source, it actually looks at defining what is the purpose of the corporation with relation to its stakeholders. And when I talk about stakeholders, it is in relation to financial stakeholders, non-financial stakeholders, community, and everybody else. And that purpose will actually define the future of the corporation, and that indeed will lead us to then look at the soul of the corporation as to what and how they are prepared to undertake this journey. This is something which is a multi-decadal effort. It's not that there is a magic switch which put us into a good situation, because as you all know that the world has spent decades in coming to creating this climate emergency that we are in across the world. There's a lot of debate about who's responsible for it, etc. But I think the world has to move on, and climate, for example, and nature do not respect national boundaries. It is a global phenomenon. And therefore, actions taken by everyone, every single global citizen, is an important action in ensuring that we leave a better world for the future generations. Corporate disclosures are in two parts. One are voluntary disclosures, and the second are mandated disclosures. And we'll talk a lot about it in the panel discussion. But it is important for corporations to understand their role and responsibility in disclosing KPIs and data and their strategy and risk and opportunities in this whole journey in a manner that is consistent, comparable, measurable, and transparent. So That is effectively a good corporate's role in today's world, irrespective of which sector, which geography that company or corporation is. And that will ensure further sustainability of the purpose of the corporation. And it is indeed, therefore, an important aspect which starts right at the board to the management, to the last man in the line. I think these are things that we should be discussing today's panel discussion. And if I were to take the opportunity to ask Mr. Amarjit Singh, since he comes from from our most important regulator for the capital markets, Mr. Singh, how is SEBI looking at aligning the financial and non-financial reporting standards? Because what we are seeing is essentially a path towards convergence of corporate disclosure. It will, in few years' time, it may not be a financial reporting and non-financial reporting. It may be corporate reporting, which is what for all listed companies, SEBI is the guardian. So how do you look at that, especially in the context that IFRS has also now set up international sustainability standard boards, which will look at this convergence? How do you envisage this path going forward for Indian companies?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chatterjee. And I also thank CII for inviting me to this event. Again, apologies for not being there in person. Coming to your question, so we started on this path of non-financial disclosures about a decade back. It goes back to 2012 when we came out with our first prescription of business responsibility reporting. It was called BRR. And I think we were, if I can say, ahead of the curve compared to many other regulators. So that was more of a light touch, but it was a good beginning. And we made it applicable for 100 companies to begin with. And then progressively, it was expanded to include 200 companies, top 500 companies, and eventually we made it mandatory for top 1,000 companies in 2019. That is for BRR framework, which was an earlier framework. But, somewhere along this journey, we realized a couple of drivers. One was, the Paris commitments, Paris Accord, and also our commitment to achieve SDGs. So Government of India, actually Ministry of Corporate Affairs, set up a committee to review the non-financial disclosures, the business responsibility, climate-related disclosures, and we were a part of that committee. So that committee looked into the BRR framework specifically and came up with a revised version, which we called BRSR. So basically, based on the recommendations of that committee, SEBI got into further detailing what should be the new framework for disclosure of sustainability related issues. So we had a very extensive consultation with industry, with the stakeholders. Let me also mention that we are not so much of climate experts, but we've learned a lot, in the process over the years. And we came up with a revised framework last year, and we said this would be applicable on a mandatory basis from this financial year. We gave 1 year for transition. And I'm happy to report, going by the last count, although it was voluntary for the year 21-22, but more than 150 companies till date have actually, adopted BRSR and made disclosures. So, our work is not over. We'll continue to work in this space going forward. But, in terms of the significance of non-financial disclosures, I think they are very important, and they are becoming more and more important as we are going forward. It also ties up with the debate of, the stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism, where companies' purpose versus profit debate is also becoming important as we go along. So those kind of shifts, bring more focus on what is company doing apart from just generating the profits or losses, year to year. What is your impact on society? What is your impact on climate? How are you treating your employees? How is the community getting affected? I think all those disclosures assume more and more significance. And that is why frameworks like BRSR come to some help. It gives you a framework, it gives you a tool for disclosure. And also, before I stop, I can also mention that, while developing VRSR, we carefully looked at the available international frameworks and GRI, SASB, TFCD, and so on. And we tried to craft it in such a way that we are not out of tune with the global trends. And we were also mindful of, the cost of making those disclosures. So we gave a certain interoperability in case a company is disclosing as per an internationally accepted framework. So you need not disclose all over again as per VRSR. You just need to cross-refer, and that will take care of the disclosure obligation. So let me pause here. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, actually, I'm tempted to ask a follow-on question, but I will come back to you after I go through some of our other panelists, because then that question itself will become more richer. So Prarthana, obviously you've been leading CDP, and we've seen how CDP is getting more and more engaged in India on climate related disclosures. Can you brief us on how we are looking from a CDP point of view on the disclosures relating to the water, forest, and natural resources? Because one of the important thing is climate and nature goes hand in hand. So it's not it's very interdependent. So how do you look at it from a CDP perspective?
Thank you, Kaushik, and thank you, CII, for inviting the CDP viewpoint. So a very important transition is happening. I think everyone is aware that in terms of overall corporate disclosures, as far as climate change is concerned, I think we've seen over the years almost a 30% increase every year. And it has been our objective to increase the water and the forest disclosures. While globally, the increase is commendable, and you can actually see it. As far as India is concerned, I think water, although has got some leverage in terms of increase, primarily because of the regulatory framework and because of the understanding of corporate sector in terms of the access to water reducing, as well as looking at opportunities within the water use, which can be, reuse, or it can be, additional use, efficient use. I think from that perspective, we see over the last 1 year of even up to 25% increase in terms of water related disclosures. We're not public with this year's disclosure, but it's very, very heartening to for me to talk about it here, that all the companies, almost almost 80% of the companies who have disclosed on climate and have also disclosed on water. So I think the trend to talk about water and water security and understand the water security needs is increasing. But what is also increasing is the identification of opportunities. And I think from last year's data, we did some calculations, and this is something that has come out from the data, that the cost of inaction as far as use of water is concerned is almost 12 times the cost of actually working with water. So I think we see a positive, to answer your question, we see a positive trend, but we do need more disclosures as far as water is concerned. In terms of forest, we're still not there as yet. And I think primarily this is also, here I'd like to quote on global data. For instance, if you look at forest-related disclosures, it's very difficult, and only about 26% of the suppliers can trace back in terms of disclosure, trace back to forest-related products. So there is actually an issue there in terms of generating the information. But I think the risks identified by companies who are already disclosing is also again high. And again, I'd like to repeat here that the disclosure is now being looked at more from an opportunity aspect and looking at internal strategies in terms of an economic benefit. So that's why I think we anticipate that forest and water-related disclosure is going to increase the way climate-related disclosures are. I'll stop there.
So Pratana, just to also ask, since you mentioned about nature and forest, would CDP also align with the ongoing framework that TNFD is working on?
Yes. So I think so far, of course, I mean, we all know that TCFD, we have TCFD aligned, and now the TNFD is going to be, very much going to come into force, and people are going to talk about it. And nature is going to be a very important component. I think globally, we are having discussions on how we want to align with TNFD. It's very early to say whether it's going to be, the same included in the questionnaires, integrated into the existing questionnaires, or is it going to be, a new questionnaire? But I wanted to say that we've also introduced biodiversity, which is also, a component, if you look at it from the perspective of nature, as part of the questionnaire from the coming year. And then there are also aspects in the water and the forest where we have, nature-related components. So while, I mean, we are very clear that we will be having or integrating TNFD into our process, I think how it's going to be done is going to evolve over the coming year.
Yes. Actually, the TNFD will come in only next year, so we need to assess in 23. If I may turn to Aniruddha, given the multinational nature of the business, how does TCS, or for that matter, the IT industry, look at the measurement and assessment of ESG across various geographies and then coming towards reporting the same to the stakeholders?
Yeah, thanks, Kaushik, and thanks to CII for inviting us and sharing our perspective. So our reporting journey actually began long ago. We started reporting into CDP way back since 2008, and then of course GRI. We used to publish the sustainability report and so on. So our experience with reporting has been quite, I would say, old, and then we have, of course, improved from there on in terms of the multiple frameworks that have come in, and we have been responding to them. So in terms of the transnational or the multinational footprint that we have built those mechanisms to actually report. So today, when we report into CDP, we report for over 150 locations across TCS, including global locations. We have mechanisms to collect data. Of course, the fact remains that our largest operations are in India. Operations overseas, though the revenues are more from overseas, our operations there are quite limited in terms of the facilities that we operate and the number of locations that we operate from. However, we have built those data collection systems built on the experience of the past 10, 12 years in collating this data. And of course, the other dimensions like social and governance, of course, we have robust mechanisms to capture data and then roll it up. Because we have got enterprise systems, internal IT systems, which kind of capture data on the social front, compliance front, and so on. So I think that has largely helped us in being able to effectively report from all our international geographies that we operate from.
Thank you. Thank you. I think my next question is to Shikhar. As an industry association like CII, one of the things in the entire sustainability journey is the way in which regulations and policy will move to facilitate and help corporates to ensure that they have the foundation to do it in a better and transparent manner. So, how do you see the role of policy in or policy advocacy as CII, and how do you see the pathway developing on this ESG journey? We heard from Mr. Singh about from the capital market related corporate disclosure approach. But if I were to turn it inside out and say that how would industry look at the whole policy paradigm and engagement with the government and other regulators?
Okay. Thank you, sir. I think from CI perspective, the way we are looking at this disclosure, and I think we have two most important authorities over here. We have Mr. Amarjit Singh from SEBI and Pratna from CDP sitting over here. So from industry perspective, I think in the initial days when GRI and other reporting framework came, we were not that much into discussion as industry association. But the way the present BRSR has been made, I think we have been quite involved as industry into what norms should be there for reporting. And what that has brought out and what Mr. Amarjit Singh also said was that in such case, the companies which are at a matured stage of reporting, means the disclosures, which are already following some international framework, what India has done through SEBI's BRSR is that we have tried to align those frameworks also. So it's not something new that BRSR is talking about, but it has also seen what the global trends are. So I think from the policy perspective, this was one important thing that how do we bring most of the companies on board and what is the right way of doing the disclosure. Now, the second thing is that when we see it from the CI perspective, the 100 or the 200 top listed companies, they have almost all the information. So you say it, they have all the data, they have the systems, and going from 200 to 800, I think, because top 1,000 listed companies have to disclose this. I think that's where our role as CI comes in very important to handhold those companies. And might be in the next session, what we have done is that we have come out ourselves from CI perspective, some voluntary tools that those companies can apply in to know where they are. And I think that also led us to another policy part was that during financial year 21-22, the data that I just understood from Mr. Singh was that more than 150 companies voluntarily reported on this. And I think they are not the only top 100 listed one. I know that there are some companies which we have assisted, which are like 500 rated or 600 and all. So I think from a policy perspective, this becomes very important that disclosure becomes very much an integral part. So I think that's what the key role from CI perspective is, that we have not to run away from the disclosure part, but this is what the fact is, and that's how the world is transforming. And another important thing that has happened is that this complete focus which has come up through ESG on investors and all, that has given a lot of traction in the boardroom. So I think that way around the policy dialogue also becomes very important now with India taking on the presidency of G20 from 1st December this year, CII hosting the B20. I think that is very important from the internationalization of the efforts that we are doing in India. So I think two major policy things where CII is involved is the B20 dialogue, which is with the Business 20 dialogue with the top 20 economies, and the G20 dialogue, where we have the ESG track also, and we have a separate track on climate change, sustainability, and energy. So I think these are the policy touch points which CI is working on, which leads to a better disclosure for the companies for the future perspective, because that's what the theme in which we are discussing, that how the future of corporate reporting is going on. So I think the policy reform is very important on those. So I will stop here, sir.
Thank you, Shikhar. Mr. Singh, coming back to you and the since you talked about BRSR, one of the things that BRSR is compared to the earlier financial or capital market disclosures is it's a principle-based framework. It gives a framework for companies to then define it. There are two points which often come to mind on principle-based versus rule-based framework, and that is the measurability of it and comparability of it, because each preparer will have the, if I may use the word, luxury to define it in the way within the BRSR framework. So in that, the taxonomy becomes very critical. What I say as green versus what somebody else says is green, or how I define decarbonization versus somebody else looking at decarbonization becomes difficult. So how do you, from a regulatory perspective, look at defining the taxonomy for the elements of BRSR? At this point of time, I'm sure Indian companies will, especially the top 1,000 companies, are looking forward to give that disclosure, because it is something even the capital market participants are asking, whether it is the analysts or the rating agencies and various others. But how do we define the taxonomy so that it is comparable, at least within the sector, if not across the sector? And the second related point is the assurance standards on those disclosures, because it becomes a more reliable and robust when there is an assurance provided. So what would be the journey of these assurance standards on the BRSR framework, if these two questions is?
Yeah, sure. So I think these are very important questions, and a very short answer to these questions is this is work in progress. But let me sort of elaborate on this a little bit. So, in terms of what you mentioned about measurability and consistency, I think those are very important elements of any sustainability related disclosure framework. So that was a limitation in BRR. And although you can say that we followed a principle-based approach, but in BRSR, we've really tried to blow it up a little. We've gone into some granular details. And I believe there are close to 500 data points. So, that makes it more objective. And just to give you a couple of examples, for example, what Pratna mentioned about the water-related disclosures. So we engaged with the water experts because we didn't have the expertise, as I said. So we engaged with the World Bank group on, water, and we came up with two kinds of disclosures there. One which would be essential disclosures. So BRSR has two parts. One is the essential part, and the second is the leadership part. So some water-related disclosures are in the leadership part. If it relates to water withdrawal from water-stressed areas, so those are in the leadership part. But if you're withdrawing water from various sources, so what are those details? That is an essential component. So my understanding is more of quantitative data orientation should help to a large extent in terms of measuring and in terms of consistency. And also what we've done additionally is we've also given a guidance note along with the BRSR framework in terms of when you approach each of those disclosures, what is in our mind, what do we mean by those terms? I mean, it's not a perfect taxonomy, I do admit that, but there is a sort of a guidance note to help the companies to get a sense of what is the expectation. So taxonomy is still a work yet to be done, that is one. On the assurance, I think I completely agree. That's another very important piece. But our, thinking was first, let's get the companies to disclose. Start disclosing as per the new framework. That's very important because it's a huge shift from BRR to BRSR. So it requires a lot of changes in the company's ecosystem also. But going forward, and also my understanding is even globally, there's a very limited assurance requirement even in Europe where you have these things more developed. So we have set up a ESG advisory committee, and one of the mandates given to the committee is to identify certain core areas, out of this entire template, which would, where we need assurance. And I believe ICAI, through their Sustainability Standards Board, they've also come out with a exposure draft on assurance. So I think it will take a while, but I really don't see great urgency. First is companies should start disclosing, and then, we come to assurance.
Thank you. I think that would be people who are listening to you today would get great clarity in terms of how to move ahead, because some of these things do clutter the mind in terms of how do we move forward. Because on a look back basis, some of these should not get them into any difficulty because they are taking their best judgment call at this point of time. Pratana, one of the important things in this whole journey is capability development, and I think CDP is in a great position to help companies in this. So, how do you kind of envisage this from a national capability development across companies, across various entities, and to ensure that we have the right skill sets to undertake this journey in the next few years?
So that's a very important question, because I think our disclosure doesn't end with the top 100 companies who have the resources and the capacity to disclose or to assess their net zero transition journey. And one of the challenges I think as a country we face is on the whole aspect of supply chain, because I think there's a lot of discussion on resilient supply chain, but we also need to start talking about the sustainable supply chain. And CDP data over the years has revealed that the emissions from supply chain is almost 11 times the emissions from an operations, internal operations. So I think, I don't know if many people know, but CDP also does have a supply chain disclosure program. And in India, we just began it last year. And it has been, I mean, our observations have come from these 3 supply chain clients we have who are actually motivating or asking their supply chain to disclose, which is almost about 700 supply chain members. What we saw is that there is an intent, there's a desire to disclose, but the capacity there is very less. Particularly because many of these, and we don't talk about this often, but many of these are SMEs or even MSMEs. So I think one of the areas where I'm glad you brought it up, Kaushik, and I'm glad that I'm in a CII forum, that I think there's a huge opportunity there for organizations like CII and CDP to work together and develop how we could look at capacity development. Because as of now, because we're a global organization, our capacity development is more directed towards how to disclose and how do you actually, fill in a questionnaire and how do you generate that information, but no one actually goes deeper into the process of disclosing. So I think that's an area where we see a very strong capacity development requirement. The second is, we have just started the Science-Based Targets Incubator, and it's a innovative kind of a model that we're starting with India. And there again, we find that, in target setting, there is a lot of needs in terms of, all the background, say, inventorization that you need to do. And there again, we feel that there's a need for capacity development. But I don't think CDP alone can do this. And I'm sure there are a lot of, organizations who are here or elsewhere who can actually build it. So I would actually recommend that, some kind of a partnership models evolve in terms of this capacity development, because there is going to be a huge need there in terms of these areas, because, right now, as Amarjit ji said, we are looking at 1,000 companies, but at some point of time we'll extend beyond, and there is going to be a need to train in terms of multiple aspects. I mean, whether it's target setting, whether it's looking at internal strategy in terms of net zero transition, and disclosures actually will play a major role. So, while to answer your question, yes, CDP is looking at capacity development, but I think there's also an opportunity for other organizations to collaborate and to feed into this whole process of capacity development.
Thanks, Pratana. It leads me to Shikhar actually, because what would CII then look at also from building capability in this space, especially if I were to look beyond 1,000 companies into the large MSME segment, because that is the core of Indian industry. So how would you plan, or how is CII thinking of planning for this?
So one thing, of course, I think me and Pratna were just discussing before this session. Of course, we have to join hands for building this capacity on the CDP disclosures. Other important part, what we have seen in last year with the BRSR in particular and going in supply chain was that, as Mr. Amarjit Singh said, that they have gotten annexure, which is a guidance annexure also, which industries are not looking into actually. So there are many such things which have been answered there. But for the supply chain part, what we are doing as of now is that people have not read the parent document, which is actually NGRBC, the National Guidelines for Responsible Business Conduct. In that, there is a very easy format of BRSR Lite version that they have given. So what we have done from CI perspective is that we have taken that BRSR Lite for the MSME sector, and we are getting a lot of traction from there, because these are some handful of 10, 15 questions which they are able to answer. And through that, their parent companies at least able to see that, okay, these are not listed companies as of now, but they are registered companies. So I think one confusion that most of the people had was that BRSR is only for listed companies, which is, yes, it is. But for all the non-listed private companies, they anyhow have to follow the NGRBC. So I think from CI perspective, we are doing both the things. For listed companies, strengthening the capabilities on BRSR, also on other frameworks like CDP, GRI, ESG, and for the supply chain per se, going in for BRSR Lite, hand holding them. And very recently, we have also released what is called as MSME Toolkit. So just for CII membership, because sir, you know that 60 to 70% of the CII membership is SMEs. So we have to see that how do we bring on board to them. So we have just got a simple toolkit prepared for them. Just fill in, see what is your performance on climate, on ESG, and then from there we can assist them further. So that's what our role is, to build the capabilities and to join hands with the like-minded institutions, whether it is CDP or GRI in past, and also with IFRS, and also we are doing sessions jointly with the ICI, what you mentioned about the SRSB. So I think these are the initiatives that we are doing, both from the capacity building point of view, hand holding the process, and that information is feeding us into the policy making part. So that's how we are planning from CI perspective.
Thank you. Aniruddha, would you have some best practices from the IT sector which will be helpful for service related companies?
Yes, certainly. I think, like I said earlier also, I mean, we have started our process way back, and I think that has helped in aligning our processes, because a lot of data that was required was actually not available. So I think building internal processes was one of the key components of our journey towards disclosure. So the CDP and then DJSI, and also a lot of customers have been sending us requests for proposals where exhaustive information is actually sought, apart from CDP and apart from the other disclosures where they. So I think building your internal process is one of the key things that company need to look at. Second is the use of technology. I think now that we're reporting over 150 locations, doing that over very simple data collection techniques is impossible. So I think switching over to technology, there's a lot of tools available in the market where you can actually have robust data collection systems. Also, having a very robust internal assurance process, because what we do is we look at external assurance at the end of the year when it's time to do the assurance. But I think having this process built in month on month, quarter on quarter, and every half year, I think that is an important learning for us. Because when we do the internal assurance, we find a lot of data gaps with a lot of artifacts which have to be collated. And now I think the entire disclosure ecosystem has moved into artifacts. Nobody believes a word that you just write. It has to be supported with artifacts. And I think that is one of the important things for us, where we have started process of collating and making repositories of artifacts which are required even for internal assurance, and of course which will help in the external assurance process. Third is, I think, start early in the process in terms of external assurance. We made our 3 geographies carbon neutral last year. Of course, carbon neutral is again a very vague term. So across scope 1, scope 2, and we just wanted to test the waters in terms of what it takes to become carbon neutral. And we did it for Europe, for North America, and for APAC. And it was primarily for testing waters, getting them groomed into it, and which meant collecting data across tens of countries, across Europe especially, and APAC, of course, handful of countries. So I think the estimation methods, because a lot of times what happens, service sectors companies, they don't have their own establishments where where data is easily available. These are typically leased offices, multi-tenanted offices, where data becomes a huge challenge. So we have actually been able to develop mechanisms of data estimation, because you have to do some kind of estimation depending on the area that you occupy, and so on and so forth. So to building in a lot of national benchmarks, Europe specific benchmarks, or North America based benchmarks in terms of consumption per square foot or square meter. Building this process was actually a huge task, which took us several months to put together. So I think from India perspective also, the companies who are into service sector will have this kind of challenge, because if they have leased spaces, multi-tenanted offices, I think this process will definitely help in putting this system together, and which we have learned over the past so many years. So I mean, our experience has been very rich, I would say, in that matter.
Thank you, Aniruddha. My last question to Mr. Singh is, given the corporate disclosures are fundamentally owned by the boards and the KMPs of the companies, and will be owned in future, whether we get it assured or not, what would be your one advice to the boards of Indian Incorporated with regard to the entire ESG space and sustainability reporting?
Even in terms of the expectations which are outlined in BRSR, there are certain expectations from the board. And but just to state very briefly, I think ESG agenda should enter the board in a very meaningful manner. It is not just something which you are obliged to do by a regulator. I think it's something which you ought to be doing anyway. And I'm quite encouraged by the fact that the 150 companies chose to disclose where they were not really obliged to disclose. So that shows that they see value in doing these disclosures. And definitely the board level attention, what is the vision that the board has on these issues? It's very important to articulate. And because you set the tone at the top, that's how it percolates down to the entire company at various levels. So, and what are the tangible goals that you are setting there? And can you report back to the board as to what are the achievements against those goals on a periodic basis and so on? So I think it definitely needs attention. It needs an action plan. It needs the articulation of a vision, and then following up on the performance against those statements.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm mindful of the time, and if I may just check if there is any 1 or 2 questions from the floor for any of our panelists before we close. Maybe Shikhar, you can see them. I won't be able to see.
Yeah, yeah.
So
There are 2-3 hands, sir, but I think we can take 2 questions might be.
yeah.
So yeah, can somebody from the back, give the mic, please, mic in the audience. Just a sec, we are arranging the mics, yeah. And may I also request whosoever are asking the question to please introduce and to whom they want to ask the question, because we have the savvy person also with us on the virtual mode. So please.
Hello, I'm Shantanu Satpathy from Aprava Energy, and it is a really insightful panel discussion. And my question would be, as we are seeing that the digitization is happening, and that is helping the companies not only data management but preparing their strategy. So, from disclosure point of view, any thoughts on how the sustainability reporting could be digitized instead of only reporting it in a report, either in the soft version or print version, so that the data can also be analyzed at a country level? And the second question is whether India could go for a ESG rating system based on these disclosures, which will have more insightful, particularly from disclosure to rating, and then the strategy for the net zero. So it is open to the panel. Maybe any of the
Mr. Singh,
panelists.
would you like to take the first part of the question?
I can perhaps take the ESG rating one.
Sure.
Because that is an area which is, gaining regulatory attention world over, and we are also concerned there. So basically, there is a need for rating and, for ordinary investors to make sense of those complicated disclosures. If it can be converted into some sort of a scorecard or a rating, it definitely helps. But then there are regulatory concerns around how this rating is done, what is the methodology followed, so that it should not misguide. It's supposed to guide the investors, but it should not mislead us. That's the regulatory concern in a nutshell. So we had come out with a consultation paper on the rating related issues, and it is still work in progress. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Any other
Yeah,
questions?
can I answer the first part of it?
Yeah,
The
sure.
digitization part. So I think most of the frameworks today, if you look at CDP, if you look at DJSI and a lot of others, they're already digitized. So you enter your responses on an online ORS, which then gets captured and report gets generated and so on. So I think it's already digitized. The other thing that most of them have done, they have also provided for cross-referencing. So the burden has gone down a little bit. So if you are already reporting, say, an annual report, and if that has linkage to the question that is asked, you can reference your annual report, and that's considered to be a valid response. I think most of them are digitized. Also, in the rating part, we also disclose to EcoVadis, which is a supplier platform which collates data on the ESG of the supplier. So you as a supplier would report into EcoVadis for your customers. So that is also digitized, and they have come up with a rating mechanism where they classify you as a bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and so on, depending on the score. And that kind of brings a lot of things in terms of the rating that you talked about. There are other rating agencies like Sustainalytics, MSCI, which give you a ESG score as well. So they would give you like a rating on A to ABC, that kind of thing. So I think already systems are existing. But for an Indian rating system, maybe we'll have to wait for some more time. But I think internationally, such rating systems are available. So that's my view.
Thanks, Ananda. Shikhar, the last question.
Yeah, there is one hand. Yeah, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. Myself is Tushar Patnaik, so heading sustainability from Dabur India. So from morning and listening into the panel section discussion, there is a very good discussion is going on. Just my point is that though it is a sustainability meet, and I think a lot of big people are sitting here also learning experts from various IT industry. So sir, questions to, I think, sir, from IT industry. So from morning session was going on and this session, Now ESG is a mandatory requirement for the listed companies. Then companies are doing this reporting system, and some of the IT's companies they are taking the targets by 2030. They will be carbon neutral, waste reduction, and everything. So my point is that suppose I think sir you are from TCS, yeah. From TCS company you told that as a Europe country you are as a carbon neutral. In contest to the Indian context, in if you are looking after the Indian prospect, your carbon reduction, what will be the target and by which year you will be completed? And even a very nutshell, if you can tell that how you are doing this carbon neutral, that is the most important where you the coming to this sustainability meet, because that is the important factor, how you are going to do that. That is the important factor. If you highlight 2-3 points, that will be better.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
I'll do that because you clearly seem very operationally focused that how you will do it. So I'll just explain to you. So we have taken up targets for carbon reduction. We're saying we will reduce our scope 1, scope 2 emissions by 70% in 2025 over a 2016 baseline. That is one target. Second is we'll become carbon neutral by 2030. These are two targets which we published last year and which are already there in the public space for people to see. Second, we have committed to SBTi now, and we'll be aligning our targets to SBTi. They're still pending finalization and submission to SBTi for the validation. So once that is done, then we will be aligned to SBTi for the net zero target, 1.5 degree aligned net zero target. So that will be a target. So whatever year we decide, 2030 or 2040, whatever, I mean, that will be in the public domain as soon as we get validation from SBTi. How we are going to do it? So we have a roadmap in terms of reducing our scope 1, scope 2 emissions. We have already begun our journey. We have, we currently reduced about 60% of our carbon emissions over 2016 baseline. So the 70% target should not be a problem. The single factor which has enabled us, so we've done a lot of work on energy efficiency and so on and so forth, a lot of rooftop solar and so on. But I think the single most enabling factor has been a lot of states have now opened up the green tariff. So in Maharashtra, in Orissa, in Karnataka, we are now actually able to get 100% RE because the green tariff has been enabled, and that has been our single largest enabler, and we'll continue to move. So like West Bengal and other states, when they start offering green tariff, we'll be able to shift very quickly to green power. Other enablers would be shifting to EV as and when the ecosystem becomes more viable. We will have a challenge on the scope 3 part because we started accounting and we already report scope 3. I think the three of our largest emissions are on employee commuting, on business air travel. These are two of the largest ones which we have and which we will have a challenge. And I think the rest of the world is also going to have a problem in terms of quickly trying to reduce those categories of scope 3. We are, of course, work in progress in terms of how do we reduce that. So that's in a nutshell how the whole plan works. Maybe we can connect offline if you want some more insights into what we're doing. You can also refer to our integrated report of this year. We have talked a lot about how we are doing it and how much we have achieved so far. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Aniruddha. And with that, thank you to my panelists. Thank you to the audience for joining in. I hope you had some kind of takeaways from the discussions. And with that, we will like to end this session.